Hi, and welcome to Creatives on Speed from Faster Ideas, where we talk to creative thinkers, makers, and doers from all walks of life about their lives and careers. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Nairn. Andy, hello.
Hiya.
Welcome to the show. So tell us a bit more about what you do and who you are and all that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I'm the founder of a creative agency called Lucky Generals. So we work with companies like Amazon and Virgin Atlantic and Co-op and Yorkshire Tea and people like that. And then I'm also the chair, which sounds like ridiculously grown up and old, of a sports agency called Dark Horses, and they do all sorts of things in the world of sport, with brands like TikTok and Nissan. So those two things keep me very busy, as you can imagine. But I've got a few sort of side hustles like everyone else has, including a thing called Lucky Bastards, which helps sort of tackle hate crime on social media. And then I've just written my first book as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, called Go Luck Yourself.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get to that because obviously it chimes with a lot of things we do on Faster Ideas. But let's that's a lot of stuff that you're getting up to right now. But let's take you back into the
Mhm.
past and creativity and what part it played when you were growing up. Were there any particular kind of creative things that you did, and what was it like growing up in terms of your creative pursuits?
Oh, yeah, great. Well, I loved writing when I was little. I've always liked writing, and my dad was a news agent, so he owned a little shop in the village, sort of thing. I grew up in the Scottish borders, and so I always had a brilliant supply of pens and jotters and things like that. I was always asking for bits of paper and notebooks and stuff. And then I wrote lots of opening chapters to very sort of angst-ridden sort of adolescent sort of novels. And I've still
Yeah.
got them. My mum kept them all, so I feel like I should one day like stitch them all together, and I'd make this like just the uber adolescent sort of angst-ridden novel of all time sort of thing. Just sort of I'm misunderstood outside. Nobody understands me, nobody likes me. Sort of,
Yeah.
not that I particularly had that sort of. Childhood or adolescence, it's that you sort of talk yourself up into that sort of you listen to the Smiths as I did in the 1980s, and it puts you into that sort of frame of mind. So there's some very funny sort of, not funny at the time, but just very funny, terrible sort of stories that I've written about that sort of thing. And then I love music as well. So I played a lot of music. I always sort of loved that as a sort of so I've played in bands, again, doing the same sort of angst-ridden sort of teenage band type stuff, but I played piano and guitar and various lots of other instruments. I like just trying out instruments because I think there's something nice about music where there's a pleasure, even if you don't get to the highest level at a particular thing, there's a joy in just having a go at something like the violin or the tin whistle or, the harmonica or something like that. So you can just try it. So lots of music and, art, I love to draw again, even though it wasn't necessarily the best sort of draftsman or anything like that, but just sort of doodling and cartoons and fun things like that. So, yeah, it was obviously the time before we had phones and all those kind of cool things. So you had to be creative, in a little tiny little village in the middle of nowhere. That was all there was to do, really.
And whereabouts was that in Scotland? You were saying borders.
It's in the
Yeah.
south of Scotland and the borders, yeah. So it's really quite sort of remote and rural, and yeah, so you had to find ways to keep yourself interested and occupied.
Yeah. So, and also that I love that kind of trying lots of different things. I think that's really important when you're growing up. And obviously, you eventually ended up in the creative industries. But what was your journey to advertising from that place in
It was
Scotland?
quite a weird one, and it was a bit of a lucky sort of stumble into it. I had no sense of, it was, this place is like the furthest from the bright lights of Soho that you can imagine. It's a very down to earth, sort of quiet sort of existence, and so I went to do law at university because I liked writing and words and sort of persuasion, I guess. I said did law, and I really enjoyed the course actually, but quite early on I realized that I didn't want to do it because I could sort of see the career that it would lead to would be quite sort of conservative potentially. So I had a chat with my tutor, and there's just a lovely tutor that I was quite close to. And he sort of said, well, if you like that sort of thing, you like putting a case together for somebody and persuading people of their case, but you don't want to do it in a conservative environment. Why do you think of advertising? And I'd never even considered. I didn't really think there was a thing called advertising. That who made that stuff on the telly. Um, but that planted a seed in my mind that I then sort of went often sort of explored. And what the weird thing was that this guy who gave me this advice is, sort of went on to take the advice himself. He's a guy called Alexander McCall Smith,
Okay.
and he's now one of the biggest selling authors in the world. So he gave up the law and
Yeah.
wrote a series of much more successful books than anything I'll ever do. But I mean, he sold like 70 million copies of, this ladies detective agency in
Yeah.
Botswana sort of series. So I like to think I've played a part in his success as well as vice versa.
We talk about luck, obviously, but how lucky to have a tutor like that, because
Yeah,
for the most part, people want to keep you on their course,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
and keep you on that path. So he was obviously, wavering a little bit about what he was doing, so he was open to having that conversation.
And actually, he was one of these sort of true creative people. He played I think he played the tuba amongst many other sort of odd sort of quirks like
Yeah,
that. So he had lots of things going on in his life, and I think he was a very good sort of role model to that degree. And also the idea that you can change, that you can make quite a big. He was obviously an established legal professor at that time, and then decides to do something different. So I feel like that's a good lesson for all of us. You can always change. You can always learn new stuff. Um, you don't have to be defined by the first thing that you start off doing. You can, change is a good thing.
so you also had that conversation, and then sort of how did you access the advertising industry from that point?
So I graduated, got my law degree because I wanted to get that in my belt still, and then I applied to these strange things called ad agencies that he told me existed, and got the usual amounts of knockbacks and all the rest of it, like everybody does. Um, but sort of got a job at what was and still is one of the biggest agencies in London, which is called Abbott Mead Vickers. And I applied to do the only job that I sort of knew about, which is the account handling job, which I guess for those of you who don't work in advertising, it's like, I suppose it's the suit kind of role.
Yeah.
And I think someone, again, I had a massively lucky break because somebody, I think in the process realized, you'd be rubbish at that. I'm not organized enough. I'm not, jazz hands enough and all the rest of it. So they sort of steered me to this thing that I'd never heard of, which is to be a planner, which sounds like a ridiculous sort of job. It doesn't really describe what you do, but it's about the strategic part of the creative process. So
Yeah.
defining what the brief is in the first place. And that was like a brilliant steer. Again, I was just very lucky on that front because that's what I've done ever since for the last, almost 30 years now.
And that's that sort of role sometimes called strategy as well, isn't
Yeah.
it? Could you
Yeah.
put you on the spot completely, but could you define the difference, or is there any difference between planning and strategy?
Do you know what? I'm not sure there's a huge. I mean, I think theoretically, um, this strategy is the big picture stuff, and uh, but there's also sort of tactical work that you might do. So I suppose strategy is when you sort of set out what this brand is supposed to stand for the next 10 years. And then, of course, there'll be individual briefs that come up, where you have to react to something going on in society, or there's just like a one-off campaign to do something, which is more tactical. I mean, it should all ladder up to this bigger idea of this strategy, but I guess all of that is planning. And sometimes you're doing strategic work, and sometimes you're doing more sort of tactical work. But they're very, as you'll know, they're very interchangeably used. And I find myself calling myself both all the time.
Yeah, thanks for that though. That's probably one of the best explanations I've had, because I put a few people on the spot about that. And also, if you're not in the industry, these terms are all completely alien and like coming
Of
in,
course.
going, "What's
But
that?" Like you
my
said.
parents or friends, when they sort of say, well, it's a nightmare to explain. So sometimes I just lie. If someone says, do you shoot the ads? Are you the director? I kind of can sometimes just go along with that if it shuts the conversation down.
It's like you just say, "I'm involved." Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sort of.
Cool. So you're in that first ad agency, and you've got your law degree, and you kind of like, in this world. What could you draw on from what you'd learned up to that point? Obviously, you've been creative when you were growing up. You'd done the law degree. What sort of things did you sort of draw on?
Well, I think growing up, and I know I've sort of been slightly not disparaging about it, but I've been joking about how quiet this sort of place was that I sort of grew up in. That turned out to be really useful because it's a very down to earth place. Place where people don't have any airs or graces. Everyone's mixes in together. I went to the local comprehensive. There was no. It's just like a very egalitarian and sort of you mix with everybody, and so that was like really helpful because of course if you've got a job like that, you're trying to understand all swathes of society and all sorts of different people. I think that helped because it keeps you grounded and in touch with, my, family were, there was people who were, my dad was a news agent, my mum's family were coal miners, lots of plumbers and shipyard workers and, steel workers and things like that in the family. So it just sort of makes you relate to just like real stuff, because of course one of the problems that advertising has got is our version of creativity sometimes is like a million miles away from the people that we're actually talking to. So I think that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really, really good thing to have. So, obviously, you work in creative industries, founded an agency, a hugely successful agency. So, do you still keep up some of those sort of creative activities that you did when you were younger? I'm presuming the music's still a huge part of your life.
Yeah, no, I still do a lot of music. Again, just for self enjoyment now. The really weird things happened that as I got back into the cello after
Ooh.
like 30 odd years. So this weird thing happened when I was a kid. This very eccentric lady. So bear in mind, there's this very ordinary part of the world, and then this absolutely crazy eccentric lady in her 70s, who was one of the greatest cello teachers in the world, inherited a house near us, and so opened up. She already had this big cello school, like the best cello school in the world in London, but she moved it to in the middle of nowhere, not even in the village, but outside the village, to this
Yeah.
mansion she'd inherited. And then what she did was she was on this mission to teach all the local kids, music. And so she had a succession of all the best musicians in the world. I mean, the greatest, properly sort of top quality musicians would come to learn from her, but she would make them then teach the local kids instruments and gave us all instruments. So you ended up in this very ordinary comprehensive, all of us have, and I had an amazing cello at the age of 10, and world-class tuition for a couple of years. And then of course it became a bit boring because it's not a cool instrument when you're a teenager necessarily.
Yeah.
So I gave that up. Anyway, fast forward to 30 years later, and so I turned 50 last year, and right at the start of lockdown, my wife for my 50th birthday got me a cello as a surprise, and it's been the most amazing thing. I mean, I'm still pretty terrible, like I'm scraping away trying to remember how to do it, but again, like I say, it's just more the exercising a different part of your brain and your body, and just gives me massive pleasure. So that is the one thing I've become a bit fanatical about recently.
Let's talk about the book. So, Go Luck Yourself. Great title, by the way. It's always good to have a cheeky title, I think, with these things. Obviously, the agency is called Lucky Generals. Is there any connection there at all?
Well, sort of. I mean, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't. If it was like a total coincidence, I'd never thought of it. But to be honest, I sort of wrote it sort of despite having an agent called Lucky Gems, because like last year, I realized that I didn't really know anything about luck. People have asked me over the years something, oh, why is it called Lucky Generals? And it comes from a Napoleon quote. Like somebody asked him, what do you look for in your officers? And he said, just bring me your lucky generals.
Ah, right. Okay.
So people have got a track record rather than just sort of bullshitters. But beyond that, I didn't really know anything about it. And then because I feel like a lot of the big stories of the last year have been about luck, like, obviously the pandemic, amazing instance of bad luck for all of us. But then, things like, Me Too or Black Lives Matter, sort of touch on privilege, which is obviously a different type of luck. And I just realized, God, I don't even know what this thing is called luck, even though I feel like it affects everything we do. And we've already explained, talked about a couple of lucky breaks that I've had, and I'm sure everyone's the same. And I think brands and organizations, and creativity generally, there's always a bit of luck involved, but we never talk about it. It's like a real taboo, at least in the West. So I thought, like a lot of good creative things, taboos are interesting, aren't they? If you can understand why do we never talk about this thing called luck, and actually can we game the system to sort of stack the odds in our favor? So that's really what the book is about. How do we increase our chances of success by sort of gaming the system a little bit?
Yeah, I mean that's interesting about luck, because if you go to sort of like the Chinese culture and other sort of Eastern cultures, there's definitely a big part of luck plays in their culture, like gifting things for luck and all this sort of
Yeah.
thing. So it's really, what did you just sort of discover about it? Do you think there's something in it, or is it just sort of mystical kind of
No, I think
things that happen?
it's very much, and it's interesting because a lot of the other things that you've got on the blog and the various other creative people have talked to you about back this up. I think that in the West we've got this belief. People will often say there's no such thing as luck. The harder you work, the luckier you get, and obviously we all have to work hard. But there comes a point when, as you've kind of explored yourself, we're going for a walk around the block or having a shower, or playing a musical instrument or going to the movies or reading a book or all those other things, they're more likely to help you strike it lucky than just slogging away relentlessly in the same old fashion, sitting in front of your computer all day. And so, luck is the friend of creativity rather than, the enemy of it. And I think there's lots of things you can do. I mean, again, I think this is something you perhaps have talked about before, where great musicians have, Bowie cutting up his bits of newspaper. So you'd get a newspaper and cut it up and throw the words in the air, and they would create new patterns. I love the fact that Tom Waits listens to two radios at the same time, and then listens for, because they're on different stations, so he listens for clashes or unusual connections between the lyrics and stuff like that. So there's a lot. The point of the book is that you can do these things deliberately, so that these happy accidents don't have to be accidental. You can actually sort of make them happen more regularly by adopting some little practices like that.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Do you have like a favorite one, just like
Yeah, well, I like, one of the things I often do is like try and find run towards a problem, because like we're all sort of trained to kind of find out, whether as a lawyer or as a creative person, you find out, well, what is the strong point of my argument, what is the accentuate the positive, which is good up to a point, but sometimes if you find a negative and you can turn that into a positive, then that's really magic. It's the old Guinness strategy, isn't it, where good things come to those who wait. They've turned something terrible, which is the pint takes ages to pour, into this amazing, beautiful, higher order sort of thought. And so what I quite often do is, when I get a brief, obviously I find out what the good things are about the product, but I'll also then go on social media and I'll go to the snarkiest, sort of bitchiest parts of Reddit or Twitter, and find out what are the nasty jokes that are made about this product, what are the cartoons that are done about this thing. And because there's often a little element of truth in those snarky comments that you can do a judo move on and flip into something more interesting.
So obviously you had to write this, and that's quite hard in itself because writing a book is no
Yeah.
mean feat. Were there any kind of tips and tricks that you had to apply to the writing process to kind of move yourself forward and motivate yourself to get it done?
Yeah, well, just having a deadline helps, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's one of those things, isn't it? I mean, again, a lot of creativity and a lot of luck is about turning something that looks like a bad thing, like, oh God, I've got this deadline, but just use the deadline to your advantage and force yourself to do it. I would never have done it if I hadn't been in this kind of unusual time over the last sort of year or so. But yeah, and then doing it in bite-sized chunks. So that was sort of helpful. Giving yourself a sort of a bigger goal. So in my case, I decided to, quite early on, right at the beginning, to sort of give all the royalties to an organization that helps working class kids get a lucky break into the industry. And that was, I felt like I needed to do that anyway, to give it it's a book about luck. So and I have been lucky over my career and other people haven't. So I felt I needed to do that anyway, just morally. But also it was quite practically useful, because then you'd be letting them down if you didn't get on with it.
Oh
So it
yeah,
was,
that's a good
I
point.
think that
Yeah.
it's like when you tell people you're going to run a marathon or you're going to give up smoking or something like that, then you're screwed, because you've told them that you're going to do it, you've got to do it. So
So it's Commercial Break, the organisation the
yeah.
royalties are going for. Talk a bit more about them, because how did you get involved with them?
The leader of it is a guy called James Hillhouse, and I've worked with him. So he's another strategist or planner or whatever we want to call them, from back in the day. So I've known him for a long time, and then he's set this up, in recognition that class is one of these things that people have, sometimes forget about, as we think about how to build more diverse businesses. And so he's really good, because he helps both candidates, so working class kids, he'll help them sort of get their, CVs and their skills in shape to apply for jobs, but he'll also help organizations be more mindful of how they recruit, and but crucially also how they behave when people are, people join. Because what happens is, a lot of the time, is people might come in the door, because we're all sort of more mindful if we must, hire more diversely, but then they get spat out of the machine sort of early on, because maybe that things haven't been set up in a way that's going to help them. So yeah, they do lots of really good work with agents, including ourselves. We've used them before. So I thought that was a nice sort of fitting cause for a book about luck.
What other projects have you got that you're excited about that you can tell us about?
Well, we just launched in America, so that's like a really exciting thing for us. In fact, we did it just before lockdown, so it's been a funny sort of, we've got this very nice office in Fifth Avenue in New York that's lying empty. So that's
Oh no.
an interesting financial sort of move, but ultimately come good. So we do a lot of good work, and we've always done a lot of work in America. We're always, again, good ideas travel, don't they? So we've done Super Bowl stuff for Amazon. That's currently sort of Emmy nominated. So that's
Yeah,
fingers
that's
crossed.
so exciting to,
Yeah,
work in advertising. You feel like this TV and film world's over here, and then you're getting nominated for Emmys. That's
exactly. It's
incredible.
actually, I think the first time, and well, we have been nominated for before actually, but like most time when we tell our friends or parents or whatever that we've got, it's the D&AD awards or the IP awards. They've never heard of any of these things. At least they've heard of the Emmys. So that, yeah, that's really exciting, and I feel like America's interesting because it's at its best. I mean, obviously there's a lot of bad American advertising, but at its best, American advertising is amazing because it does sell. They're very persuasive. They've got great salesmanship, but they do so with fun or with emotion. They've got a lot to teach us, I think. So
Yeah.
that's a really exciting thing, and of course it's sort of slightly paused over the last 18 months. We've been a wee bit quiet, but we're looking forward to sort of getting back into that once things get a wee bit more normal.
Yeah, really excited. You guys are doing some great work at the moment, and really always excited to see when you've got new campaigns coming out. They're always very good, so it's cool. Thanks very much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you very much.